The hidden 10-year rule to become wealthy quietly. There's an old Greek proverb that says a society grows great when old men plant trees whose shade they know they will never sit in. I think about that line a lot, because most of us do the opposite. We make financial decisions optimized for next month, next year at the most. We want to see the results. We want to feel the progress. We want something to show for it while people are still watching. And that instinct, completely human, completely understandable, is quietly the reason most people never build the kind of wealth they actually want. Here's what the data shows. Only 8% of Americans have a financial plan that extends beyond 5 years. But 91% of self-made millionaires, when surveyed, said their wealth was built during a quiet period that lasted at least a decade, a stretch of time when almost nobody around them knew what they were building or why. That's not a coincidence. That's the pattern. In this video, I want to walk you through what I call the hidden 10-year rule. Not a strategy exactly, but a way of thinking about time and money that changes everything about what you do today. Stay until the end. The last part is the one most people never hear. Comment 10 years below if you're ready. Let's get into it. Warren Buffett bought his first stock at 11 years old. A small purchase, 3 shares of a company called Citi Service Preferred, split with his sister. He paid $38 per share and watched the price drop almost immediately, which caused his sister some anxiety. He held. The price recovered. He sold at a small profit. He would later say that selling those shares was one of his early mistakes because Citi's service went on to multiply many times over. But that's not the part of the story I want to focus on right now. The part that matters is what happened next. For the following 2 decades, Buffett worked quietly. He read, he studied, he made investments that nobody outside a small circle of people in Omaha, Nebraska had any reason to care about. He wasn't famous, he wasn't on magazine covers, he wasn't giving interviews about his philosophy or his process. He was just sitting in a room, doing the work, accumulating knowledge and capital in a way that was completely invisible to the wider world. By the time he was 30, he had roughly $1 million. Which is meaningful, but it's not the number people associate with Warren Buffett. The number people associate with Warren Buffett is somewhere north of $100 billion. And here is the detail that most people absorb intellectually, but never really feel in their bones. 99% of Warren Buffett's wealth was accumulated after his 50th birthday. 99% after 50, which means the decades that nobody was watching, the quiet years in Omaha when he was just a guy reading annual reports in a modest office, were not the prelude to his success. They were the foundation of it. Every dollar he had at 50 was the result of the invisible decade that came before it. And every dollar after 50 was the result of that foundation holding firm long enough for time to do what time does. This is what the 10-year rule actually means. It does not mean you wait 10 years and then something dramatic happens. It means you commit to a decade of work that nobody else will see, understand, or particularly care about. And you do it anyway, because you understand that the foundation being laid in the quiet is the only thing that makes everything else possible later. The challenge is that we live in an environment that makes this almost psychologically unbearable. Every platform you use is optimized to show you other people's results. Someone your age just made a large return on an investment. Someone a few years younger just bought their second property. The feed is a continuous stream of outcomes without any of the preceding years of quiet work that made those outcomes possible. And the natural human response to that feed is to feel behind, to feel like you should be further along, to feel like there must be a faster way. There isn't a faster way. There's only one way. I met a woman at 62 who had started investing seriously at 52. She had spent years feeling like she had missed her window, like the decade she should have started in had come and gone, and there was nothing to do about it now. What shifted for her was a single realization. The 10-year rule doesn't care how old you are when you start it. It only cares that you start it and that you stay with it. She stopped comparing her timeline to people who had started earlier and committed to her own quiet decade instead. At 62, she told me it was the most financially productive 10 years of her life. Not because she found some clever shortcut, because she finally stopped looking for one. Whatever age you are right now, and I mean this genuinely, not as reassurance, the next 10 years are available to you. The question is only whether you are willing to spend them building something that nobody around you may understand or acknowledge while it's happening. That willingness, more than any strategy or investment vehicle, is the actual starting point. And once you understand why the quiet decade works, once you understand the specific mechanism that makes 10 years of invisible work more powerful than almost any alternative, the decision to start becomes much easier to make. Benjamin Franklin died in 1790, and in his will, he did something that most people who read about it assume must be a mistranslation or an exaggeration because it sounds too strange to be real. He left 1,000 pounds sterling, roughly equivalent to about $4,000 at the time, divided equally between two cities, Boston, where he was born, and Philadelphia, where he had built his life. And he attached a single condition to the gift. The money could not be touched for 100 years. After 100 years, a portion could be withdrawn for public use, but the remainder had to sit for another 100 years after that. The full 200 years expired in 1990. When the accounts were finally opened, the original $4,000 had grown to more than $6.5 million. Franklin had not made a sophisticated investment. He had not timed the market or found an unusual opportunity or applied any particular expertise. He had simply understood one thing more clearly than most people understand it today. 2 centuries later, time, applied consistently to money, does something that no amount of cleverness can replicate in a shorter period. Franklin wrote about this in his letters with an almost startling directness. He said he was not leaving the cities money. He was leaving them time, because time, he believed, was the only financial asset that could not be manufactured, borrowed, or replaced once spent. Most people understand compound interest as a mathematical concept. They've seen the charts. They know that money grows over time when left alone. But understanding it as a concept and feeling it as a principle you actually organize your life around are two completely different things. One is information. The other is a decision. Here's what the numbers look like in terms that are specific enough to be useful. According to Fidelity's 2026 retirement research, $10,000 invested at the age of 45, growing at an average annual rate of 7%, becomes approximately $54,000 by age 65. The same $10,000 invested at 35, under identical conditions, becomes approximately $107,000 by the same age. The only variable is 10 years. The difference in outcome is $53,000, created entirely by time, requiring no additional contribution, no additional risk, no additional effort. $53,000 that cost nothing except the decision to start a decade earlier. A guy I knew cashed out his retirement account at 45 to renovate his kitchen. $34,000. He paid the taxes and penalties. The kitchen was done in 6 weeks and it looked genuinely beautiful. What he didn't sit down and calculate, and what I only worked out later when I thought about it, was that $34,000 left untouched for 20 years at a modest rate of return would have been close to $130,000 by the time he retired. He traded a future for a backsplash. And the trade felt completely reasonable in the moment because he could see the kitchen and he couldn't see the future. That's the core difficulty with compound growth. It is invisible in the present and enormous in the future, which means the human brain, wired to respond to what it can see and feel right now, is structurally poorly equipped to make decisions that honor it. Every time you choose to spend money that could compound, you are making a trade between something visible today and something invisible tomorrow. And the visible thing almost always wins in the short term. The practice that shifts this is not complicated, but it does require doing it once with real numbers. Sit down this week and calculate what your current savings, whatever amount is sitting there right now, will become in 10 years if you do not touch it. Not a rough estimate. The actual number using a compound interest calculator that takes 10 minutes to use and is freely available anywhere online. Most people have never done this. And the reason it matters is not motivational. It is practical. When you can see a specific future number attached to a specific present decision, the decision starts to feel different. The money stops being abstract and starts being a 10-year commitment to a version of your life that is already being built, whether you are paying attention to it or not. But here's what I want to add to this, because it is the part that most conversations about compound interest leave out entirely. Money is not the only thing that compounds over 10 years, and in some ways, it is not even the most powerful thing. Charlie Munger was asked once, at one of Berkshire Hathaway's annual meetings, what the single most important habit behind his success had been. The audience was expecting something about investing strategy, risk management, or how to evaluate a business. What he said instead was so simple that it took a moment to land. He said, "I just read. Every day, for as long as I can remember, I just read." He estimated that he spent several hours a day reading, not news, not social media, not content designed to be consumed quickly and forgotten. Books, long-form material, history, science, psychology, biography, business, philosophy. He described himself as a learning machine, and he said the returns on that reading had compounded in the same way that money compounds in a bank account. Slowly at first, invisibly. And then, at some point, that was hard to pinpoint exactly, in a way that became impossible to ignore. Munger was not a prodigy. He was not particularly famous in his 40s. He had a successful legal career and then a moderately successful investment track record, but nothing that would have made you predict what the second half of his life would produce. What he had, accumulated quietly over decades, was a framework for thinking about almost anything, built from thousands of hours of reading that nobody around him was measuring or rewarding or paying attention to. When the opportunities came that matched what he had built, he was ready in a way that someone who had spent those same hours differently simply could not replicate quickly. You cannot compress decades of accumulated understanding into a weekend course or a year of intensive study. The compounding had to happen over time, and it had happened because he had started early and never stopped. This is the second layer of the 10-year rule. Skills compound. Knowledge compounds. The depth of understanding you build in a specific area over a decade becomes something qualitatively different from what 2 or 3 years of focused effort can produce. Not just more of the same thing, but a different kind of thing entirely. According to research published in the Harvard Business Review, in 2025, people who dedicate at least 1 hour per day to developing a single focused skill over 10 years accumulate more than 3,600 hours of deliberate practice. That number crosses the threshold that researchers associate with genuine expertise in most fields. And the people who reach that threshold without formal credentials or institutional backing tend to find that the market rewards them at a level that surprises the people around them, even if it shouldn't surprise anyone who understood what had been quietly happening over the preceding decade. I know a man who spent 8 years learning real estate law in his spare time while working a completely unrelated job. Not taking courses necessarily, though he took some. Mostly just reading, asking questions, attending local meetings, paying attention to deals in his area, and trying to understand the legal mechanics behind them. His coworkers had no idea he was doing this. It wasn't something he talked about. At 54, he started offering consulting to small property developers in his city. Within 3 years, he was earning more from that work than from 30 years of his regular career combined. Nobody saw it coming, but it had been coming for 8 years. The 10 years of quiet work had been done. The results were simply the visible surface of something that had been building underground for a long time. The practical piece here is specific, and I want to be precise about it because vague advice is easy to ignore. The goal is not to become a generalist who knows a little about many things. It is to identify one area where 10 years of consistent attention would make you genuinely exceptional, and to start that 10 years now. Not 5 areas, not a broad self-improvement program. One thing pursued with the same patience and consistency you would apply to a long-term financial investment. 30 minutes a day is enough. It is not impressive as a daily commitment. Nobody will congratulate you for reading for 30 minutes before bed or listening to something substantive on your commute. But 30 minutes a day, over 10 years, is more than 1,800 hours. And 1,800 hours of focused attention applied to one subject will take you further than almost any credential or shortcut you could find instead. The question worth sitting with before the next section is this. If you became genuinely exceptional at one specific thing over the next decade, what would that thing be? Not what sounds impressive. What would actually matter to the life you want to be living 10 years from now? Skills compound in the quiet. But there is a third asset that compounds in the quiet as well. And most people underinvest in it their entire lives because it is the hardest one to see building until it has already been built. Rabbi Akiva was 40 years old before he learned to read. This is not a metaphor. This is the historical record as preserved in the Talmud. He was a shepherd, the son of a convert, with no formal education and no particular reason to believe his life would look any different in the decades ahead than it had in the decades behind. By every external measure, his window for becoming anything other than what he already was had long since closed. What changed was a relationship. He met a woman named Rachel, the daughter of a wealthy landowner, who saw something in him that he had not yet seen in himself. She encouraged him to study. She supported him financially while he did. And over the years that followed, Akiva built relationships with the greatest teachers of his generation, sitting with them, learning from them, absorbing not just their knowledge, but their ways of thinking and their networks of connection. He spent a decade in study that was invisible to most of the world, during which time his relationships with the right people deepened slowly and quietly into something that could not have been manufactured quickly, regardless of talent or resources. By the time he was 50, Rabbi Akiva had become one of the most influential scholars in Jewish history. His teachings shaped the foundation of the Talmud. His students numbered in the thousands. And when historians trace the arc of how a 40-year-old illiterate shepherd became one of the defining intellectual figures of his era, the answer is not genius. The answer is relationships, built slowly and genuinely over a decade, with people who were further along the path he wanted to walk. This is the third asset that compounds in the quiet. And it is the one that most people underinvest in, because it is the hardest one to treat as an investment without it feeling transactional, which immediately makes it less valuable. The distinction worth making here is between networking and relationship building. Networking is what happens at events with name tags, where people exchange cards and connect on LinkedIn and follow up with emails that trail off after a few exchanges. Relationship building is something slower and more genuine. It is showing up consistently for people without an immediate agenda. It is being the person in a room who is genuinely curious about what someone else is working on, rather than looking for an opening to talk about yourself. It is giving before asking, for long enough that the giving becomes simply who you are in the context of those relationships. The returns on this kind of investment do not show up on a quarterly statement. They show up years later in a phone call that opens a door you didn't know existed, in a recommendation made on your behalf by someone who has watched you work for a long time, in an opportunity that arrives because someone thought of you and trusted you enough to pass it along. According to LinkedIn's 2026 economic research report, 85% of roles are filled through personal networks rather than public applications. And people whose professional networks were built over more than 10 years earn on average 34% more than people whose networks are less than 5 years old. The financial return on a decade of genuine relationship investment is measurable, substantial, and almost entirely invisible while it is being built. The best investment I ever watched someone make was a man who spent 7 years being genuinely useful to people in his industry. No strategy behind it, no networking plan. He just showed up to things, paid attention to what people needed, and found ways to help when he could. He asked good questions. He remembered details. He followed through when he said he would. None of this was dramatic. All of it was consistent. When he eventually needed something, a significant introduction that could have taken months to arrange through formal channels, he made one phone call. The person on the other end said yes before he had finished explaining what he was looking for. 7 years of quiet investment returned in a single conversation. One practical thing worth doing this week, not as a networking exercise, but as a genuine act of attention. Think of 5 people whose work you respect and whose judgment you trust. People who are doing something you find genuinely interesting or admirable. Reach out to one of them, not to ask for anything, just to say something honest about why you respect what they are doing. That is the beginning of a relationship that might matter more than you can currently see. Money compounds in the quiet. Skills compound in the quiet. Relationships compound in the quiet. But there is a fourth element to the 10-year rule that none of the first 3 can survive without. And it is the one that most people never identify as a risk until it has already done its damage. Marcus Aurelius kept a private journal, not for publication, not for posterity, though it survived and became one of the most read books in history. He wrote it for himself as a daily practice of honest self-examination, in the middle of a life that was by any external measure already successful beyond what most people could imagine. He was the emperor of Rome. He had more power, more resources, and more security than almost anyone alive in his era. And yet the thing he returned to again and again in those pages, the concern that ran underneath almost every entry, was not about power or money or legacy in the conventional sense. It was about time specifically, about the ease with which time disappears without you noticing, and the particular kind of loss that comes from looking back at a period of your life and realizing that most of it was spent on things that didn't actually matter to you. He wrote at one point that it is not death a man should fear, but a life never fully lived. And in another entry, something that lands differently when you read it slowly. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. The Stoics were not a passive philosophy. They were deeply concerned with action, specifically with making sure that the time available to you was being used in ways that aligned with what you actually valued, rather than simply drifting through years in response to whatever was immediately in front of you. Apply that to the 10-year rule, and what emerges is this. The greatest financial risk most people are carrying is not a bad investment, a market downturn, or an unexpected expense. It is the risk of spending another decade in the same pattern, optimizing for comfort and social approval in the short term, while the compounding that was available to them continues to be deferred until some future moment that never quite arrives. Delay has a specific cost. And unlike most financial risks, it is one that most people never calculate because it requires looking at what didn't happen rather than what did. According to Vanguard's 2026 retirement planning research, a person who begins serious saving at 45 rather than 35 needs to set aside approximately 3 times as much money each month to reach the same retirement outcome at 65. Not 30% more, not 50% more, 3 times as much. Every decade of delay roughly triples the monthly effort required to arrive at the same destination, which means that the caution that feels like safety, waiting until the time is right, until the income is higher, until things settle down, is actually one of the most expensive decisions a person can make. It just doesn't feel expensive because the cost is invisible. You never see the bill. You only see eventually that the destination is further away than it needed to be. A woman I spoke with spent 5 years waiting until she had enough to start investing properly. She had a number in her head, a threshold that felt like the right amount to begin with, responsible and meaningful rather than small and symbolic. What she didn't account for was that every month she waited, the cost of catching up was quietly increasing. When she finally sat down and did the calculation, she found that the cost of waiting those 5 years was larger than the entire threshold she had been waiting to accumulate. She had spent 5 years trying to save enough to do it right, and those 5 years had cost her more than the savings themselves. The insight that shifts this is not about urgency in the anxious sense. It is about clarity. Time is not a neutral backdrop against which your financial decisions are made. It is an active participant in every decision, either working for you or against you, depending on whether you have started or not. Marcus Aurelius did not write about money, but he wrote obsessively about the tendency of human beings to defer the life they want to live, to treat the present moment as a rehearsal for some future moment when conditions will be better and everything will finally be in order. And he kept coming back to the same conclusion. The conditions never become perfect. The future moment never arrives pre-packaged with clarity and readiness. There is only the decision you make today, in the actual circumstances of your actual life, with whatever you have available right now. Starting imperfectly is not a compromise. It is the only real option that exists. The next section is the last one, and it is the one I want to spend the most time on, because it answers the question that everything else in this video has been building toward. Not what to do, but who you become during the decade that nobody is watching. I want to tell you about a man I'll call Thomas. Thomas was 42 years old when 2 things happened in the same calendar year that most people would describe as a collapse. His marriage ended, and the company he had worked for over 15 years went through a restructuring that eliminated his position, along with several hundred others. Within 12 months, he had lost the 2 anchors that had organized his daily life for the better part of 2 decades. He told me later that the strange thing about that period was not the grief, which was real, or the financial anxiety, which was also real. The strange thing was the silence. He had always had somewhere to be, someone expecting something from him, a role that told him who he was in relation to other people. And then, suddenly, he didn't. The calendar was empty in a way it had never been before, and the question of what to do with that emptiness was the most unsettling thing he had faced in a long time. He made a decision that he described as almost accidental at first. He decided not to announce anything, not to declare a comeback or post about his journey or tell people what he was planning to build. He just started doing things quietly. He opened a small investment account with what remained of his savings and set up an automatic contribution that he told himself he would not touch, regardless of what happened. He started reading in an area he had always been curious about, but had never had time for. He reached out to a few people whose work he respected, not to ask for anything, just to have honest conversations about things he was genuinely thinking about. Nobody around him knew what he was doing. His friends saw a man going through a hard stretch. His family was quietly worried. From the outside, his life in those first 2 years looked smaller than it had before, not larger. But something was happening underneath that nobody could see. He told me that the absence of an audience was the most important condition of that period. Because when nobody is watching, you stop performing. You stop making decisions based on how they will look and start making them based on whether they actually move you in the direction you want to go. The investments he made were not impressive enough to talk about. The skills he was building were not yet visible to anyone. The relationships he was cultivating were quiet and genuine rather than strategic and public. None of it had a story that would have made sense to someone on the outside looking in. At 52, 10 years after the year everything fell apart, Thomas's life looked from the outside like a modest upgrade on what it had been before. A smaller house, but paid off. A simpler life, but entirely his own. A professional situation that had shifted in hard ways to explain quickly, because the explanation required understanding what the 10 preceding years had actually contained. What it contained was a foundation, built in silence, without applause, without anyone tracking his progress or holding him accountable or understanding what he was trying to do. And the foundation was what made everything that came after it possible. According to a 2026 national study by Ramsey Solutions on millionaire behavior, 88% of self-made millionaires in America described the period during which they built their wealth as boring and invisible to everyone around them. Not exciting, not dramatic, not something they could have made a compelling social media account about. Just consistent, quiet work done over a long enough period of time that it eventually became undeniable. No viral moment, no overnight transformation, no single decision that explained the outcome. Just a decade of small decisions made in the direction of something real, while life continued happening around them, and nobody in particular was paying attention. Here's the question I want to leave you with, and I mean it as a genuine invitation to sit with, rather than a rhetorical device. If nobody was watching for the next 10 years, not your friends, not your family, not anyone on any platform, if there were no external validation available, no likes, no recognition, no one to tell you that what you were doing was working or worthwhile, would you still make the choices that you know are the right ones? Because the 10-year rule ultimately lives or dies in the answer to that question. Not in any strategy or investment vehicle or financial plan. Whether you are willing to build something real in the years when nobody around you can see what you are building. Thomas is 54 now. He told me recently that he thinks about those 10 quiet years as the most important decade of his life. Not because of what he accumulated, though that matters because of who he became during them. Quietly, without anyone watching, he had stopped being a man defined by what other people could see and started being a man defined by what he actually did when no one was looking. That, more than any account balance, is what the 10-year rule is really about. 6 sections. One idea running underneath all of them. The wealth that lasts is built in the years when nobody is watching. Not in the dramatic moments, not in the lucky breaks, not in the decisions that make good stories at dinner. In the quiet decade, you show up consistently, make small decisions in the right direction, and resist the pull to perform your progress for an audience that isn't keeping score anyway. You don't need to start over. You don't need a perfect plan. You just need to identify your quiet decade and begin it. This week, with whatever you have available right now, pick one thing from today. 1. It could be opening an account you've been putting off, starting with 30 minutes of reading in a subject that will matter to you in 10 years. Reaching out to someone whose work you genuinely respect. Any of those is a beginning. If this video shifted something for you, drop 10 years in the comments and tell me, what will your quiet decade look like? I read every single one.